Hello, welcome to my life. My name is yours truly. I'm here in the studio with John and David, but I'm also with you at home, wherever you may be. I hope you're safe. I hope you're feeling good. And I'm really excited, but also complexed at the current reality. There's no audience here, but the audience is instead where you are. But maybe that means I can say whatever I want. Interesting. Anyway, what I'm going to do is present to you a piece and then explain to you where it came from. I think that would be the best thing to do. So yeah, get comfortable, relax, and let's begin. This first piece is called No Mandazi za Java. The first time you realize there is no mandazi at Java, you'll be on a date, and it will be said in passing like it doesn't really matter. But it does. The second time you realize there are no chapatis at Java, you turn to the front of the menu and read the slogan, Kenya's favorite coffee house. But what are you supposed to drink the coffee with? At that moment, you will question things, but you won't think about it again until you go to Nyama Mama for the first time. You and your friends will order tilapia, chapati, and nyama choma. And when you look around, you wonder who owns this place. Good question. The first time you realize Nyama Mama is not owned by Kenyans, you think how crazy it is that foreigners can get rich by selling us back our own African experience. How they threw tribal art on the walls, put kikois on the ceiling, then got masses of white people to visit. Who would have thought that you can sell githeri and avocado for 600 shillings and people would still buy? Everybody except you. You, the Kenyan who says, I can't leave my house to eat githeri. Are you serious? I'd say I go to a restaurant and eat mokimo. And what you mean to say is that experiencing your own culture is not foreign enough for you. What you mean to say is that things that are innately Kenyan are not exotic enough for you. Do you see the problem? You will never see mandazi at Java. You will never see chapati on the menu because anything Kenyan is not premium. It has to be foreign. It has to be different. The first time you realize our culture is broken, you'll be at Java once more, trying to order the chicken stroganoff, and realize you're more likely to spend money on food you can't pronounce before you spend money on the food that you grew up with. Call it self-hatred, lack of national pride, or even a colonialist mindset. But isn't it crazy how Kenyan musicians are campaigning for Kenyans to listen to their own music? How 5-star Kenyan restaurants don't serve Kenyan food? How the best Kenyan schools aren't Kenyan at all, and the best companies belong to foreign corporations? One day this country will no longer be our own. Not because we gave it away, but because we didn't have pride enough to keep it. When the Chinese take over, and we are resource rich but economically poor, like DRC or Zambia, when our youth will have no jobs, I wonder if we will think back to that moment. That moment when we realized there were no mandazi at Java. But by then, it will be too late to go back. This is the moment where you clap, alone in your house, or you snap your fingers, whatever you want to do, you're alone. Nobody will judge you here. This piece came from me wondering why there is no mandazi at Java and why they don't serve chapati. And I think if you asked some of those people that own those restaurants, if they were really blunt and honest with you, they would say something like, those kinds of foods are for the common wananchi. And if they were to try and serve those things, they would diminish the standard of their restaurants. And that is really sad, because I don't imagine that is how it is in other countries. I mean, Italians still eat spaghetti at their favorite restaurants, right? But we have this mindset of the things that are innately made here are not that great. And instead we value things that come from outside, food that we can't pronounce. Apparently that is the standard, and maybe that came from colonialism, maybe that came from his psychology that we have, but it is sad. And I don't have all the answers. But my responsibility is to get you to question why that is the case. What drove us to have this kind of mentality? Why are there no mandazis at Java? Now I get into the second piece. This one is slightly different. Okay, I hope you're ready. One day, my friend Louis proposed that we all go rock climbing. Rock climbing. We looked at him like we sometimes look at Kanye West. Like there was something wrong with him. And then, like a black choir on Sunday in unison, we said, "Nah, man, that is some white people shit." Now, before you judge, let me explain. The term white people shit is not considered offensive. Instead, it is used to infer that different races are predisposed to different kinds of activities. For example, it is unlikely that a black person will play in the snow, or choose to climb rocks, or surf in the ocean. One explanation why is because certain activities are not native to black people. Snow, for example, is not indigenous to the African continent we come from. For that reason, a black person making a snowman is, by definition, doing some white people shit. But now, that begs the question, where do we draw the line? How many black people doing white people shit will it take for an activity to no longer be considered white people shit? Or, if a black person does white people shit in a forest and nobody sees him, did he do white people shit at all? You see the problem? When I was 14, my friend told me a joke. He said, if you live in Africa, where should you hide your money? Where, I asked him. In your books, he said, because niggas don't read. It was funny at the time. But what I realized is from a young age, I have been okay degrading myself and the people around me. Telling myself that there are things I shouldn't do and can't be because of the color of my skin. I've noticed that the term white people shit is not only used to infer that certain races are predisposed to different activities, it is also used by black people to limit other black people's experiences, to keep you from trying anything that your society deems un-black or un-African, to keep us from trying new things. That day, when my friend Louis asked to go rock climbing, I saw myself and all my friends transform into colonialists. To tell him, a mere African, what he can and can't do. To limit him from his aspirations, his dreams. To keep him in the box that we should have left the day our country got independence. Climbing rocks is not white people shit. But telling your fellow African why they can't. Now that is some white people shit. So that piece was called White People Shit. I don't know if you came to that conclusion from listening to the poem. But basically, this poem came from exactly where it sounds like it came from. We were together with my friends and my friend Louis Abuga. I'm sure he's watching this. We saw this rock climbing thing and he said, one day we should go rock climbing. And then we looked at him and said, nah, man, that's some white people shit. And there is this mentality that we sometimes have that limits us from our experiences. As a man, there are things you are supposed to do. As a woman, there are things you are supposed to do. As a black African man, there are things you are supposed to do. Rock climbing is not something that African people do. And sometimes it is funny, but other times I found it can be quite limiting. One time a friend of mine, when he saw me reading, he called me white, saying that reading is what white people do. saying that advancing myself or trying to advance myself is something that white people do, and not me as an African, which is what I would almost refer to as a self-racism, that there are things I can't do because of where I come from. And that mentality is crippling. And so that piece was just trying to make people aware that sometimes that is how we think, that there are things you can't do because of where you come from. And the people holding you back from doing those things aren't necessarily people from elsewhere, they're your own people. It's like that crabs in the bucket metaphor where, crabs tend to keep each other inside the bucket. And I think our mentality as seeing each other as people on the bottom, we tend to try and keep ourselves there because that reaffirms the narrative that we already have in our head. And I think that gets dangerous sometimes. But you can draw your own conclusions from that piece. White people shit. Now, I'll move on to my last and final piece. And this one is called Chom Chom. I hope you're ready. I hope you're comfortable. Here we go. A lot of people tell me I take things too far. Like when my American friend tasted nyama choma for the first time, and I thought to myself, yo, what if she likes it? What if she likes it so much that she learns how to make it? What if she makes it in America and they like it? What if they start eating it? I've seen what they've done to Mexican food, to Chinese food, turned it American, so American that the Mexican and Chinese people don't even like it. Haven't you seen how they take other people's food, call it their own, and sell it back to them? What if they do the same to us? You think I'm overreacting, don't you? But think about it. What if they have restaurants making millions from nyama choma, but then they can't pronounce it, so they call it chom chom or nyam nyam? And the people, the Americans, they just eat. They don't even know where it comes from, or even that it's goat meat. They love it. And just like that, chom chom goes worldwide. And there will be restaurants everywhere. In London, in Paris, in Sydney. Chom chom. The tagline will be, food from the African village. An authentic African experience. And then, after several years, they will bring chom chom home to Nairobi. And what's worse, we will like it. We will forget the real nyama choma we used to make, and chom chom will be everything. Just like we forgot chicken when KFC came, or steers when Burger King came. There will be no more mbuzi, just chom chom. And the demand for goats worldwide will skyrocket. And who do you think is going to sell the goats to them? You see it now. How we will sell our goats to have them fed back to us. Doesn't that sound familiar? Like copper, gold, diamonds, oil, timber, all African natural resources that foreign corporations extract and transform into goods to feed back to us. Do you see how the scales are tipped? How the system is rigged? How neocolonialism can be served like meat? How my American friend in all her kindness is still dangerous? Anyway, she didn't like the meat. She said it was too tough, too hard to eat. So maybe there are some things the West will allow us to keep. Sometimes I ask myself, why is Africa poor? Maybe you ask yourself the same question. Why are we poor? I'm sure some of you think of different reasons. You say, oh, we have bad governance. We have poor leadership. We don't know what to do with the resources that we have. But for me, the poverty equation is very simple. They say we need to become a more developed country. But how does one become more developed? I'll give you an answer. And I'm about to get really theoretical, but stay with me. We need to develop industries. Let me give you a real example. South Korea. A long time ago, what they did, they wanted to develop a car manufacturing industry. And so what they did is they basically said that no foreign car manufacturing companies will come into their country. Basically, if you were in South Korea, you had to drive a South Korean car. And what did that do? That made their car industry grow. Basically, they invested and protected their industries. And over time, you've seen how car manufacturers like Hyundai that come from South Korea, maybe in the beginning they were not that good. Maybe they couldn't manufacture good cars. But now they're one of the leading car manufacturers in the world. And when I think about our country, I wonder if I was to try and make a car here. First of all, from day one, I would already compete with Nissan, Toyota, all the best car manufacturers in the world. And I probably wouldn't be able to make the car as cheap as them or as good quality as they can. And so I would stop. And so that industry of car manufacturing just wouldn't exist. And so that industry doesn't grow. It doesn't create jobs. It doesn't economically empower people. Now, at that point, you could blame the government. You could say, the government should help us protect these industries so we can create jobs. But the more I think about it, I don't really blame the government that much. Because what I've realized in all my reading is that they try and tell you that poverty is just something that happened, just suddenly came to be. But poverty is created. Poverty is a system, and it is a product of a system. Let me take you back to several years ago when we first got independence, and several African countries got independence. When leaders across the global south were saying things like, we no longer need the West. We will nationalize our own resources. Take Zambia, for example, the copper that they make. They said, no more. You will no longer take our resources. We will manufacture them and sell them to you, and you will make us rich. Of course, the West didn't like that. Their corporations that were extracting from their colonies didn't like that. And so they did things. They funded military coups. They took out leaders. They gave weapons to rebel groups, all in an attempt to get the right person, the person that would further their interests into the right seat. And that's what they did. They got these dictators like Idi Amin to do what they wanted them to do. And that's how it worked. And then they employed debt. And they gave these dictators loans. And when these dictators couldn't pay back the loans because they didn't use the money for the right purposes, they employed what we call structural adjustment programs. If you know about economics, you will know these things. But these programs were basically meant to help us become developed enough to pay back the loans, when really they did the exact opposite. And what they did is liberalize our markets. They said, we want to export to you guys, to your market. Let us take our stuff into your market without very little resistance. We don't have to import from you, that's fine. We just want to get stuff into your market. And you see it still now today. Why are we importing fish from China? And maybe you could say, okay, there's a lot of demand for fish, but the tilapia that comes from China is somehow cheaper than the one that is produced here. So if I'm a fish farmer, what incentive is that for me to make fish? if the one that is coming from outside is cheaper than my own fish? That is killing the industry. But how does that happen? How does someone allow that to happen? It's debt. When you're indebted to a place like China, how much can you really stop them from doing? And they say things like, okay, if you don't pay the loan back, we'll take over your port in Mombasa. These things have been compounded over time. By the way, those loans that we initially took have been paid back over and over. But they were made on compound interest. And if you know anything about compound interest, it gets higher and higher every year. We will never pay back those loans. And there are people that know this. Thomas Sankara is a famous former leader of Benin. When he voiced in the African Union that we will never pay back the loans and we should default on all of them, he was killed 3 months later. That's not a coincidence. And so when I read the newspaper and I see things about Uhuru, Raila, Ruto, to be honest, those are surface level things. The problems we have are so much deeper. And it's like we are just trying to brush the leaves or trying to cut off branches when the tree is so much bigger than we think it is. Until we have a leader or some way we can address the real systematic problems, the poverty that is being created, nothing is going to change. It doesn't matter who you vote for. They might as well just be a puppet. And I think we need to realize that. And maybe you're learning this all for the first time, because I was never taught this. And they will never teach you that, because they don't want you to know. The challenge is, how do you communicate that to people? I'm just here with my poems, trying to communicate different messages. I hope it does something to you. I hope it shows you a little bit of how this world is, how poverty is created. Thank you for joining my life.